The dominant language spoken along the Great Southern River by the 15th century was not of local origin, nor from far across the Eastern Sea, but a flowing creole of Old Norse and Choctaw, the common tongue of a vast trade network. Steel weapons and tools, forged in workshops nestled by the inland seas, using techniques brought from the Northlands and perfected with local knowledge, armed the warriors and cultivators of new American kingdoms. Great halls of learning in a flourishing Greenland saw scholars debate philosophies penned in runes adapted from the star charts of Maya priests. Fleets, their sails catching the northern winds, mastered the Grand Banks, their holds filled with enough salted fish to feed continents. Number 11. The Greenland Scholasticate. Long after its historical counterpart faded into icy obscurity, the Greenlandic Scholasticate thrived, a beacon of knowledge in a transformed North Atlantic. Freed from reliance on a struggling Iceland or a distant Norway, this Greenland became a pivotal intellectual and cultural hub. Its success was initially built upon a more sustained and integrated Norse presence in North America, which provided a steady flow of resources, new ideas, and importantly diverse populations. The harsh environment of Greenland spurred innovation, particularly in architecture, hydroponics adapted from southern Vinlandic settlements, and unique forms of geothermal energy. Utilization. Capital Gardar was not a remote bishopric, but a bustling city with stone-built universities, their libraries filled with sagas written not just on vellum, but also on treated birch bark, detailing histories of Norse interaction with the Skrælings, the indigenous peoples of the new lands. These weren't just Norse records. They included collaborative chronicles, often penned by individuals of mixed Norse-Indigenous heritage. Scholars at Gardar meticulously studied and translated texts brought by adventurers from the far reaches of the American continents. Imagine runic transcriptions of Iroquoian, Great Law of Peace, or detailed Norse analyses of Aztec pictograms alongside astronomical charts from both Viking and Mesoamerican traditions. The Scholasticate became a neutral ground for diplomacy, not just between the various Norse settlements in North America, but also with emissaries from indigenous nations and eventually the first wave of other European explorers who found a surprisingly complex political and intellectual landscape awaiting them. Greenlandic cartographers were renowned, their maps combining Norse navigational know-how with geographical knowledge gleaned from decades, even centuries, of exploration deep into the American interior and along its coastline. Their understanding of ocean currents and wind patterns, enhanced by this intercontinental exchange, was unparalleled. This intellectual prowess made Greenland an unlikely but undeniable center of influence, its power derived not from armies but from knowledge, diplomacy, and its unique position bridging worlds. Number 10. The Cod Lords of Hóp. The sagas spoke of Hópaland, of self-sown wheat and abundant grapes. But in this timeline, its lasting fame came from the boundless bounty of the sea. Located on the shores of what we call Newfoundland and the surrounding coasts, the domain of the Cod Lords was built upon the inexhaustible shoals of cod. These weren't scattered fishing outposts. They were fortified towns and bustling ports, their harbors thick with longships, knarrs, and newer, broader-beamed fishing vessels adapted for the harsh North Atlantic. The original Viking settlers, perhaps Leif Erikson's and Thorfinn Karlsefni's groups, managed to establish a permanent growing foothold, partly through sustained immigration and partly through a complex, often tense, but ultimately functional relationship with the native Beothuk and Mi'kmaq peoples. The key to their power was the processing of cod. They perfected techniques of salting and wind-drying fish on an industrial scale, creating a non-perishable protein-rich food source that became a vital trade commodity. Skreed Konungar, or Cod Kings, controlled vast fleets and production facilities. Their product fed not only the burgeoning Norse colonies across North America, but was also exported back to Iceland, Greenland, and even Norway, significantly altering the economies of those regions. As European powers began their own tentative exploration centuries later, they found the Grand Banks already dominated by these Norse-American mariners. Culture of the Cod Lords was deeply maritime. Their laws, their songs, their very identity revolved around the sea and the annual cod migrations. They developed sophisticated navigational skills, essential for exploiting the offshore banks, and their boat-building traditions blended Norse designs with innovations learned from indigenous watercraft, resulting in vessels uniquely suited to the local conditions. They were a hardy, independent people, fiercely protective of their fishing grounds, which they viewed not just as a resource, but as their ancestral right established through generations of toil and adaptation in a challenging new world. Their influence was felt wherever their preserved fish traveled, making them a quiet but foundational economic power. Number 9. The Markland Timber Consortium. Vast dark forests of spruce, fir, and pine covered the lands the Norse called Markland, corresponding to parts of modern-day Labrador and Quebec. While the sagas mentioned it as a source of wood for Greenland, in this alternate history, Markland became the seat of a powerful timber consortium, an organized entity that controlled the felling, processing, and export of unparalleled quantities of high-quality lumber. The success of Norse colonization further south and west created an insatiable demand for wood, for ships, for homes, for fortifications, and for fuel. Markland rose to meet this need. Its settlement strategically located along rivers that allowed for the easy transport of logs to coastal sawmills and ports. The Norse of Markland weren't just lumberjacks. They were master foresters and woodworkers. They developed advanced sawmilling techniques, possibly powered by water wheels, long before they became common in much of Europe. They understood forest management, practicing selective logging and reforestation to ensure the sustainability of their most precious resource. Their jarls and timber magnates amassed considerable wealth, not in gold or silver, but in the green gold of the forests. This wealth translated into political influence among the other Norse-American states. Interaction with indigenous groups like the Innu and Naskapi was crucial. These groups possessed intimate knowledge of the vast interior forests, and alliances or trade agreements with them were essential for accessing the best timber stands and for overland fur trading routes that often complemented the timber industry. Markland's shipyards produced not only sturdy cargo vessels for transporting lumber, but also warships to protect their trade routes. The availability of Markland timber fueled the maritime capabilities of all the Norse-American powers, allowing them to build larger and more numerous fleets than would have otherwise been possible. When other Europeans eventually arrived, they found that the prime forests of this region were already under the sophisticated management of a well-established Norse-speaking power, ready to trade but also to defend its claims. Number 8. The Kanata Jarls. Pushing inland from the great estuary of the St. Lawrence River, Norse explorers and settlers eventually reached the vast network of freshwater seas known today as the Great Lakes. Here, in what they might have called Kanataheim or something similar, derived from local indigenous place names, arose a unique collection of powerful jarls. Their strength was founded on a combination of factors: control of the fur trade, access to rich copper deposits, fertile agricultural lands around the lakes, and strategic alliances with powerful indigenous confederacies, such as groups related to the Haudenosaunee or Anishinaabe. These weren't just Viking outposts. They became integrated societies where Norse and indigenous traditions, languages, and bloodlines mingled significantly. The Kanata Jarls became masters of inland waterway navigation, adapting their longship designs for lake and river travel, creating new types of vessels suitable for transporting furs and trade goods. Their metalworking skills, particularly with iron and copper, were highly valued. They established smithies that produced not only tools and weapons for their own use but also trade goods, sought after by their indigenous allies and neighbors. Copper from the Lake Superior region, worked by Norse smiths, became a significant export. The political landscape was a patchwork of jarlsdoms, sometimes rivals, sometimes allies, their relationships often cemented or broken by the shifting dynamics of the fur trade and alliances with indigenous nations. These jarls controlled access to the heart of the continent. Their warriors, often of mixed ancestry and skilled in both Norse and indigenous fighting styles, were formidable. They adopted many woodland survival and warfare techniques from their allies, making them particularly effective in the dense forests and along the waterways of their domain. When later European arrivals attempted to penetrate the interior, they encountered these established powers, who were deeply entrenched, well-armed, and part of a complex web of trade and diplomacy that had existed for generations. The lingua franca in many parts of this region was a creole of Norse and Algonquian or Iroquoian languages. Kanata Jarls were a testament to Viking adaptability and their capacity to forge new societies in concert with existing cultures. Number 7. The Vinland Coastal Republics. Along the milder, fertile coastlines south of Markland, where grapes and self-sown wheat truly did grow, the original Vinland settlements didn't coalesce into a single kingdom, but evolved into a series of independent, often competing, but culturally linked coastal republics. Think of city-states like Strömfjordur, Nyakopong, or Laisborg, each centered around a major river mouth or sheltered bay, from the coasts of New England down to perhaps the Chesapeake. Their power was maritime, based on trade, fishing beyond just cod, shipbuilding, and intensive agriculture in their fertile hinterlands. These republics developed a distinct culture, more mercantile and perhaps more democratic in ethos than the jarlsdoms further north or inland, with powerful councils of merchants and landholders, known as thingmen, guiding their affairs. Their populations were a thorough mix of Norse descendants and various Algonquian-speaking peoples, leading to unique cultural fusions. Religious practices blended Norse deities with local spiritual traditions, and their art and craftsmanship reflected this duality. They were skilled navigators of the Atlantic coast, their ships plying routes from Greenland in the north to, occasionally, the warmer waters of the south, trading goods like furs, timber, agricultural products, and crafted items. These republics fostered innovation in shipbuilding, developing vessels that were faster and more maneuverable, suitable for coastal trade and defense. While often rivals for trade dominance, the Vinland republics would band together against external threats, forming naval alliances when necessary. They were among the first Norse-American powers to have sustained, and often conflicted, interactions with later European arrivals. These newcomers found not a sparsely populated wilderness, but a series of well-established fortified port towns inhabited by a Norse-speaking mixed ancestry population that was commercially astute and fiercely independent. The Vinlanders, as they came to be known, were key players in the early transatlantic exchanges, their knowledge of the American coastline and its resources proving invaluable and often challenging to explorers and colonists from Europe. Their legacy was one of adaptation, trade, and a stubborn insistence on self-governance. Number 6. The Mississippian Norse chiefdoms, Rissaland. Imagine Norse longships perhaps adapted with shallower drafts, navigating the vast Mississippi River system, which they might have called Rissaland or Great Riverland. Instead of merely raiding, some groups of Viking descendants integrated with or significantly influenced the existing Mississippian cultures. Known for their large earthen mounds, sophisticated agriculture centered on maize, and complex chiefdoms. This fusion created a new, powerful hybrid civilization in the heart of the continent. These Mississippian Norse chiefdoms controlled the fertile floodplains, establishing large fortified towns with distinctive architecture, blending Norse longhouse designs with the platform mounds of the Mississippians. Their power was agricultural and commercial. The introduction of Norse iron tools, like plows and axes, could have revolutionized Mississippian agriculture, leading to greater surpluses and supporting larger populations. In return, Norse settlers adopted maize, beans, and squash, transforming their own subsistence patterns. The river system became a vast trade network with goods like copper from the north, shells from the Gulf, and agricultural products from the heartland flowing through their territories. Norse runes might have been adapted to record genealogies on ceremonial copper plates or to mark trade goods. The warrior traditions of both cultures also merged. Norse metal weaponry and armor, combined with Mississippian tactics and numbers, would have created formidable military forces. These chiefdoms, led by rulers who might claim descent from both Norse Jarls and Mississippian Sun Chiefs, exerted influence over a wide area. Their religious practices could have been a fascinating syncretism, with figures like Thor and Odin perhaps finding counterparts or being incorporated into the existing Mississippian cosmology. When European explorers eventually pushed into the interior, they would have encountered not scattered tribes, but organized populous states with a strong agricultural base, advanced metalworking, and a ruling class that traced its lineage back to the adventurous Norsemen who first sailed up the Great River centuries before. Number 5. The Helluland Stone Merchants. Far to the north, in the stark, treeless landscapes the Norse called Helluland Land of Flat Stones, likely Baffin Island, and parts of the Arctic mainland, a specialized and surprising influential power emerged: the Helluland stone merchants. While seemingly resource-poor compared to Vinland or Markland, Helluland possessed unique geological assets. The Norse settlers here, likely a smaller, hardier population, forged close alliances with the native Dorset or later Thule Inuit peoples. This collaboration was key to survival and prosperity in the harsh Arctic environment. The Inuit possessed unparalleled knowledge of Arctic survival, hunting techniques, and local resources, while the Norse brought metal tools, boat-building skills, and access to southern trade networks. The basis of their power was the quarrying and trade of specific types of stone. High-quality soapstone, essential for carving lamps and cooking pots, kuliks, and ukosiks, was a primary export, valued by both Norse and Inuit communities across a vast northern territory. They also controlled access to deposits of slate for tools and building, and perhaps even sources of native copper or iron ore from meteorites, which were immensely valuable. In time, their expertise extended to other northern resources: walrus ivory, narwhal tusks, and fine furs from Arctic animals, traded south for timber, grain, and metal goods. The Helluland settlements were small and fortified, built to withstand extreme weather and potential conflicts. Their culture was a unique blend, with Norse language incorporating many Inuit terms related to ice, snow, and Arctic wildlife. Their spiritual beliefs likely saw Norse gods adapted to the Arctic environment, perhaps with an emphasis on Olra, the god of hunting and skiing, or a syncretism with Inuit deities. Though not a large demographic power, the Helluland stone merchants controlled resources vital for life and trade in the north. Their strategic location also gave them early knowledge of Arctic sea routes and changes in ice conditions, information highly prized by other Norse-American states. They were the quiet gatekeepers of the high north, their influence subtle but far-reaching. Number 4. The Solskin Jarls of California. Imagine a daring group of Norse seafarers, perhaps driven off course by storms, or undertaking an incredibly ambitious voyage of exploration, rounding the southern tip of the American continent, or even making a trans-Pacific journey from hypothesized eastern settlements. They arrive on the sun-drenched shores of what we know as California, a land of fertile valleys, abundant game, and unbeknownst to them, initially gold. These became the Solskin Jarls, the Sunshine Jarls of a remote and prosperous land they might have called Califia, possibly adapting a local name or one from fanciful tales. Here, they established agricultural settlements, benefiting from a mild climate that allowed for diverse crops, including grapes for wine, which would have delighted them. Their interaction with the diverse indigenous Californian groups, such as the Chumash, Ohlone, or Miwok, would have been formative. These groups had sophisticated knowledge of the local environment, complex trading networks, and unique maritime skills, particularly along the coast. The Norse, with their metalworking and larger shipbuilding capabilities, could have formed alliances or established dominance, leading to a hybrid culture. They might have adapted their farming techniques to Californian conditions, and, crucially, discovered and begun to exploit the region's gold deposits, initially for ornamentation and trade. The Solskin Jarlsdoms would have been relatively isolated from other major Norse-American powers for a considerable time, leading to a distinct cultural development. Their version of Old Norse might have evolved differently, and their art and mythology would have incorporated Californian flora, fauna, and Indus motifs. Their power grew from agricultural wealth, control of coastal trade routes, and eventually the allure of gold. Once contact was more firmly established with other Norse settlements or even with trans-Pacific traders, Californian gold would have made the Solskin Jarls incredibly wealthy and influential, drawing traders and adventurers to their distant sun-blessed shores. They would have been a western anchor of Norse presence in the New World, a land of legend and opportunity. Number 3. The Amazonian Serpent Riders, or Merflot. Driven by an insatiable thirst for exploration, or perhaps seeking legendary lands described in fragmented indigenous accounts, a contingent of Norse adventurers and their descendants navigated their way into the vast, labyrinthine river system of the Amazon, which they might have called Ormerflot Serpent River. These were not your typical Viking raiders. To survive and thrive in this entirely alien environment, they had to adapt profoundly. They formed complex relationships, sometimes as allies, sometimes as mercenaries, sometimes as conquerors, with the myriad indigenous peoples of the Amazon basin. Their numbers were likely never large, but their impact was significant due to their technology and organizational skills. The Serpent Riders, a name perhaps earned from their mastery of river navigation and their long, slender river craft, adapted from longship designs but built with local timbers, became a unique riverine power. They controlled key stretches of the Amazon and its tributaries, taxing trade and establishing fortified trading posts at strategic confluences. Their martial prowess, combining Norse weaponry with indigenous jungle warfare tactics, made them formidable. They traded iron tools, weapons, and perhaps even unique hybrid technologies for exotic Amazonian goods, medicinal plants, rare woods, vibrant feathers, animal pelts, and perhaps even knowledge of potent poisons or hallucinogens, which became valuable commodities in their trade networks that stretched to other Norse-Americans in their trade networks that stretched to other Norse-Americans. Their culture would have been a profound fusion. Norse religious beliefs would have been heavily syncretized with Amazonian shamanism and cosmology. Their diet, dress, and daily life would have been almost entirely adapted to the tropical environment. They might have even incorporated giant river serpents or jaguars into their mythology and iconography, alongside echoes of Thor and Odin. The Serpent Riders were a mysterious and somewhat feared power, masters of a domain largely impenetrable to outsiders. Their knowledge of the Amazon's secrets, its peoples, its resources, its hidden dangers made them key, if enigmatic players, in the broader tapestry of this alternate American continent. Number 2. The Mexico-Norse mercenaries, Gilnir men. Some Norse bands, renowned for their ferocity and seafaring skills, ventured far south along the Gulf Coast, eventually making contact with the sophisticated, populous, and often warring city-states of Mesoamerica, perhaps during the post-classic period of the Maya. These Norse warriors, known locally perhaps by names translating to blonde men, or due to their desire for precious metals, the Golnir men, golden men, in their own tongue, found a niche as elite mercenaries and traders. They didn't have the numbers to conquer these empires outright, but their iron weapons, armor, and distinct fighting style made them highly sought after by competing rulers. These Golnir men formed tight-knit warrior brotherhoods, offering their services to the highest bidder, much like the Varangian Guard in Byzantium. They established small fortified coastal enclaves, or were granted special quarters within the Mesoamerican cities. In return for their military aid, they received gold, jade, obsidian, cacao, and other valuable trade goods, which they then transported via their own coastal shipping networks, linking Mesoamerica with the Norse settlements. They also brought Norse goods, like metal tools, or perhaps even horses, if they managed to breed them successfully in their new territories, which would have dramatically altered Mesoamerican warfare and society. Culturally, the Golnir men would have remained somewhat distinct, maintaining their Norse language and core beliefs, though inevitably there would have been intermarriage and cultural exchange. They might have adopted certain Mesoamerican deities or rituals, or perhaps seen parallels between their own gods and the local pantheon. Their presence would have significantly altered the balance of power in Mesoamerica, providing a new military element that could tip the scales in regional conflicts. They acted as a conduit for goods and ideas between two vastly different worlds, becoming wealthy and influential not through ruling vast territories, but through their specialized skills and control over unique trade connections, a warrior aristocracy thriving on the frontiers of empires. Number 1. The Pan-American Althing. As the centuries passed, and the various Norse-derived settlements and states across North and even parts of South America matured, a need for coordination, dispute resolution, and common defense arose. This led to the gradual formation of the Pan-American Althing, a grand council or confederation, inspired by the ancient Icelandic Althing, but operating on a continental scale. It wasn't a centralized empire, but rather a deliberative assembly where representatives from the Vinland Coastal Republics, the Kanata Jarls, the Mississippian Norse chiefdoms, the Cod Lords of Hóp, and even more distant groups like the Salskin Jarls or observers from the Golnir men enclaves would meet. Importantly, this Althing also included influential leaders from allied indigenous nations who had become integral parts of this new American socio-political landscape. The Althing met periodically at a predetermined, often neutral site, perhaps in the central part of the continent, or on a major island to debate matters of interstate trade, resource allocation, mutual defense, pacts, and relations with the Old World powers, as they began to make more sustained contact. Laws passed by the Althing, while not always enforceable by a central military, carried immense weight and were typically respected due to mutual self-interest and the collective strength of its members. It developed a sophisticated diplomatic corps, fluent in various Norse dialects, creoles, and key indigenous languages. This body became the primary interface for European kingdoms seeking trade or treaties in the Americas. Pan-American Althing commanded significant economic power through the combined resources of its members, from Markland timber and hop cod to Mississippian grain and Californian gold. It could also, when necessary, coordinate formidable military forces, combining Norse-style warriors with indigenous allies, equipped with locally produced steel and possessing extensive knowledge of the American terrain. This Althing represented the culmination of successful Viking colonization, not a monolithic Norse empire, but a complex, diverse, and uniquely American network of states and peoples bound by shared history, intermingled cultures, and a common desire to determine their own destiny on the global stage. It was this entity that ensured the New World met the Old on far more equal terms.